For their opening statements, all the candidates have been asked to address the same question, which is this: what action will your party take in the next Parliament to recover the health of our seas and the fish in it?
This election, we are choosing the Parliament that will be in charge of Scotland's recovery from coronavirus. Nobody has been left unaffected by the pandemic, and everyone agrees we need to build back better. The Scottish Women's Equality Party says we need to do more than that. We need to build back equal. The pandemic has laid bare the inequalities in our society and made many of them worse, and we are here to address that. Before the pandemic, we had experienced over a decade of austerity, which prioritised GDP growth over the well-being of people on our planet. We also found ourselves facing the reality of Brexit, which has undoubtedly affected a huge number of people and their livelihoods, not least those in the marine, fishing, aquaculture and seafood industries. And as is so often the case, women are hit hardest when hard times hit, and yet they are also excluded from being part of the solution. Why does this matter? It matters because equality is better for everyone. We know that a more diverse workforce results in a more efficient and productive workforce. We know that having more women in decision-making roles results in greener and more sustainable policies. And we know that the gender pay gap is a significant contributing factor towards poverty and poor health, which drive unsustainable behaviours and practices. So it's in everyone's interest to achieve gender equality. The causes of habitat destruction and climate change are inextricably linked to traditional economic systems, which exploit the environment and women's work to maximise profits. In turn, the impacts of climate and environmental change disproportionately affect the poorest people and the poorest places, particularly women. Without a doubt, a more inclusive approach to democracy and sustainability are necessary to help our planet. Whether we are elected or not, we are challenging the other political parties for their votes so that they take notice and realise that we need radical change that prioritises the well-being of our people and planets. We want to extend democratic processes, making them more participative so marginalised voices are heard. We want citizens' assemblies to scrutinise local and national budgets and democratic fora like citizens' assemblies at a national and local level to inform environment and climate-related actions. And we want women's commissions to advise local and national government on the action they should be taking to tackle the threat to our planet and its ecosystems. We're calling for equal representation at COP26, because without women and other minoritised people, we will not be able to achieve climate justice or blue justice, and we are pushing for a global ecocide law. We want to build a care-led recovery that recognises the barriers women face in entering employment, particularly male-dominated sectors, so we can innovate at a faster pace, especially in those areas that are crucial to the health of our planet. We want to close the gender pay gap for good, so that we can lift families out of poverty, which is so often the driving force behind unsustainable practices and behaviours. And we want to end gender-based violence, which we actually cannot do unless we start to live more sustainably, because scarcity of resources drives violence in the home and conflict internationally. We exist in a vicious cycle at the moment, where habitat destruction contributes to climate change and climate change contributes to poverty, which drives unsustainability. The only way to break out of this cycle is to start to flourish, is to do things differently and do them better. It's time to innovate and collaborate to make our industries more inclusive, resilient and sustainable, and that must involve women. Thank you.
What are the issues impacting the health of our seas and the fish in it? Well, we've got to identify those, and I would sum them up. The common fisheries policy, although we've come out through Brexit, but that was a political tool, not fisheries management. There's competition for marine space, displacement, poor or lack of science, and some of the architects who've drawn up some of the policies have taken the industry to where it is today, and what we've seen is a collapse of our coastal communities right around the coast. Introducing schemes such as the licensed parking scheme has created wealth out with the industry, not within the industry. So what needs to be done? We've got an opportunity for a clean sheet. Cut regulation, because what we've had over the last 30, 40 years is regulation over regulation. If something is not easy to understand, it's difficult to follow and implement. We need a realignment of quota because the change in our environment where the fish are. We need to stop the hypocrisy, the emotive grandstanding, the last box of cod in the North Sea. Some things like that have not helped the perception of the industry. So we need to respect a number of factors. It isn't just about our fishermen. the fact that fish themselves are predators. A quota imbalance has disastrous impacts on the environment and the economy. And there are other predators consuming far more than has been caught. I would describe the Common Fisheries Policy as a Christmas cake, just eating the marzipan and throwing away the rest of the cake. This sums up the CFP, and for 40 years, no politician has grasped the nettle. Before other panels blame Brexit and Westminster, this problem has been for 40 years. However, fisheries is devolved, so much of the problem today rests with the Scottish Government. But going back to when Labour was in the driving seat, and prior to that, the revolving door of Westminster fisheries ministers before the Scottish Parliament. What we see now is a plan produced by the Scottish Government, which is totally meaningless. It gives no direction, no clear strategy, and not raising the quality, the true value of our seafood. So this leads to displacement. What we've seen over the years, first the oil industry came in and a lot of areas were lost. Now we have the offshore renewables, and off the coast here, 200 or 300 turbines. Okay, the turbines are okay, but you look at the seabed, the impact it's having installing all the copper wire, a mesh of copper wire across our seabed. But this goes very quiet because it suits certain agendas. The Scottish industry can't deal with this alone. When we see in our own waters, I've just spoken to a young fisherman who's downstairs who said that he's seen a 40 to 50% increase in fishing activity from foreign boats. So if we tie up our boats, it's not going to resolve the situation. The Scottish industry has been the sacrificial lamb. More so today, with processors under the strain and our seas being raided by foreign boats. The domestic fleet is continually attacked, but they're the ones that pay the price. A frenzy of Russian boats fish not far out of our territorial waters. Fish do not recognize boundaries. So we have to look forward, start with a clean sheet, but more so and be more inclusive of the fishermen. That's those who go to sea, who can tell you what's happening, inclusive of our processors who know what the markets are. But we also have to include our communities, because it is the communities who suffer when the fish and the environment is in decline. Millions of pounds worth of fish.
So, sorry to interrupt, John, but that's you drawing to a close.
Okay. Yeah, okay. The CFP broke the day it was drawn up. It has been reformed 3 times, so let's start with afresh. Thank you, Chair.
I think, as we build back after COVID, then the effective, sustainable management of the marine resource is going to be absolutely critical to the recovery in our coastal and island communities in particular. Most of what I can talk about in 3 minutes, which isn't a great deal of time for a subject like this, will probably relate to the fishing industry, some to agriculture. But there are other forces that are going to be at play here for our coastal and island communities. So marine tourism, for example, the development of marine renewable energy through wave and tidal power, aquaculture, inshore fishing being balanced with all these other competing interests. At its heart, I think we are going into a parliament where we will be making decisions that can set the course for the marine environment for the next generation. And that's why this discussion at the moment really matters. Essentially, what Liberal Democrats would like to see is a system of fisheries management that would be more localised in its construction and its execution, and which would bring together all the different competing interests. So it would have, as part of any management structure, not just the scientists and the conservationists, but the industry in its different iterations at the table. And because what is going to work for fishermen in my constituency in Shetland or in Orkney is not necessarily going to be the same thing that will work for communities off the West Coast. Post-Brexit, and I think you have to, I don't want to exhume that particular corpse, but you've got to recognise there's a lot still to be tidied up after that, if I can put it euphemistically. You saw the chaos that there was for fish exporters in the first week in January. That's been described as teething problems. I don't think it was any such thing. I think you've risked a number of systemic barriers there to exports unless we get that right in the future. What the government is actually going to do for in-year quota swaps it is still far from clear, and that's us now coming into April. So the industry need answers on that. I would also like to see, though, a bit more of an emphasis in our education system, showing the young people that the fishing industry can be an industry that will offer them a livelihood for the rest of their working life. I think too many of our young people in our island and coastal communities have walked away from that in recent generations, and that's why we've had all the problems getting visas for foreign crews to come here from overseas. And of course, because I'm into my last few seconds, I know, Rob, we've got to get serious about plastic pollution. So much of that ends up in the marine environment. And I'm out of time, but I'll tell you more about that if I get the question later on. Thank you.
Maintaining the health and resilience of our seas can't be overstated. They are vital to the habitat, are a vital habitat for a diverse range of species and are crucial to providing ecosystem services and outperform many terrestrial habitats in terms of carbon capture. We need our seas, and we always have done. Humans have relied on seas for transport and food for centuries. Currently, in the region of 75,000 people in Scotland are employed in the marine economy, and about 5,000 of these directly in fishing. We in Scotland land 60% of the UK's catch, and so we're in a position where our fleets and our policies are at the forefront of the fight to improve the quality and sustainability of our fishing practices. If in a position of influence in the next Parliament, the Scottish Conservatives have a bold plan that will see our seas improved, as part of the nature bill that we'll be bringing forward. We fully acknowledge the importance of ensuring that fishing practices are sustainable. A healthy and well-maintained marine environment is essential to the long-term future of the fishing industry and the continued benefit we get from the ecosystem services it provides. We believe every government has a duty to protect the diverse natural habitats of our seas by implementing proportional measures that are fully informed with the best available evidence. We want to see the state of our seas restored to thriving, fertile habitats, supporting a diverse range of species, understanding the wider benefits of this to society, the economy, and the climate. We will take an evidence-based approach, appreciating that there are many interacting factors that impact the state of our seas and the species and habitats within them. And therefore, any sudden, unassessed changes that can have unexpected and potentially damaging consequences. We are also very conscious of the jobs, livelihoods, and local areas that rely on our seas. Marine protection areas need to be reviewed and enhanced with proper enforcement and regular assessments to ensure that they're yielding the increases in biodiversity, stocks, and seabed quality that they're there to provide. On top of support to replace the structural funding, UK government has invested £100 million in the growth and development funding for the fishing industry. And we can use this money to see that boats and ports are upgraded to lead to a more environmentally friendly fishing fleet across Scotland. In short, the Scottish Conservatives are committed to working with all stakeholders who want to see a more sustainable fishing industry. We will adopt an evidence-based approach to decision-making, which balances the undeniable need to protect our seas while safeguarding jobs and the marine economy. Thank you.
As we plan a recovery from COVID, we must shape a future with new, fair opportunities for the people of Scotland in the context of both the climate and nature emergencies. And our marine heritage has great significance to Scotland's culture, history, and economy. But climate change, unsustainable fisheries, industrial development, and pollution have caused widespread degradation across marine ecosystems. And Scottish Labour want to see the marine environment given the same dues as it is on its land equivalent. To tackle these simultaneous challenges, there must be what we're calling a blue recovery, which is economic and environmental recovery fused in sustainable development. Scottish seas include so many marine biodiversity and precious habitats. And last year there was a damming leaked Nature Scott report, which found that the habitats had shrunk in some areas to virtually disappearing. 10 years since the Marine Scotland Act, Scotland's marine environment is in crisis in our view, and Scottish Labour will introduce high protections for a good percentage of our inshore seas, and we'll be announcing that in our manifesto next week. We're also determined that there should be an inshore fisheries bill so that all the conflicting and complex things that are going on in our inshore environment are actually taken into account with all the stakeholders. The MPA network is far too slow in progress, and management and enforcement remain key challenges, and these must be addressed. It must not be a series of paper parks. And sadly, illegal dredging remains a huge part of the problem, and we desperately need the rollout of electric monitoring. And it's a long time since the SNP government had promised this. So certain species must not only be cherished for their own ecosystem value and the ecosystem-wide benefits, but in their role in carbon sinks. And I have seen the precious delicacy of kelp forests and sand eels for myself in Hoosenish Bay when going on the very, very cold North Harris snorkel trail. Not to put anybody off, because it was really worth it. And I worked with the Greens to limit the harvesting of the kelp forests unless this was done sustainably. It is ludicrous to argue that dredging or combing, as some call it, of the kelp is not destructive. I've always striven to highlight the importance of blue carbon, and now in my new role as the COP26 spokesperson for Scottish Labour, I will promote the Ocean Conservation Declaration called Because the Ocean at Scottish and UK levels ahead of the summit. We must also tackle the issue of plastics and fishing nets, as highlighted in the recent Netflix films, which I found very shocking, as I'm sure we all did. It is essential that the regional marine plans are developed inclusively. Marine tourism, sustainable fisheries, renewable energy, so much to accommodate. And in the next Parliament, the shortcomings of the aquaculture industry must be further addressed. We all know the status quo is not an option. And this, frankly, goes beyond party politics, although it is an election at the moment. And I hope that we can discuss this further tonight. So I look forward to the discussion, and there is so much to do to better protect and enhance, as it says in the Marine Act 2010, our marine environment. And I look forward to hearing the questions. Thank you very much, Rob.
I think it's a really interesting question. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, what are you trying to recover? What is the vision for recovery? What is the objective here? And I think probably most people on this hustings tonight would agree that, you know, we need commercial fish stocks to be relatively healthy. Although over the decades, they've only really been a couple of steps away from collapse. And I think most people would agree that, you know, we need protection for rare habitats. Although most of the protection we see at the moment is only just fragments of the extent of these habitats used to be in previous decades and centuries. But, you know, that's not the green vision. The green vision that the Scottish Greens are putting forward in this election is to ensure that we get a full-scale regeneration and rewilding of our seas, to deliver the kind of abundance and diversity that hasn't been seen in living memory. So that requires big change. It requires not just fiddling around at the edges. It requires big change. And it needs politicians who are unafraid to challenge vested interests, to be perfectly frank with you. And also politicians that are prepared to work with communities to put the case for why that restoration can deliver that long-term economic health for those communities. Now, you know, the Greens, we've had a small number of MSPs in the Parliament, but we've been working to deliver that vision. So I put forward the ban on kelp dredging. We've won campaigns on banning ship-to-ship oil transfers in the Cromarty Firth. We've raised concerns about acoustic deterrent devices. We've used our budget deals with the SNP to bring forward funding for marine protected areas. But, you know, this is just scratching the surface, and there's a lot more that we want to do. So marine protected areas, unfortunately, have been up to now largely paper parks. Over half of the MPAs that we have in Scotland have no kind of protection management plan associated with them. You know, over half of them, fishing is unrestricted in MPAs, which is a disgrace, quite frankly. We want to bring back the 3-mile limit. We want to see the critical inshore fisheries, inshore coastal environments protected from dredging and trawling. And we want to see a moratorium on salmon farm expansion until the industry can properly reform itself. You know, I've worked with communities a lot over the last 5 years who've highlighted concerns about salmon farming. And the industry needs to reform. We need to get to a point where we can phase out the open cage salmon farms, which are causing so much pollution. Alongside that, our seas need investment, which is why we're also proposing a marine environmental levies fund of up to 17 million levied on industries like oil and gas, minerals, aquaculture, to invest in the seas, to invest in that recovery. But we've got to be bold, and that's why I'd say, you know, you should vote like the future of our seas depends on it in this election, and vote to put more Greens in the Scottish Parliament.
I think the first thing just to record, I think as others have done, Rob, is that, you know, Scotland is a maritime nation. It always has been in its history since humans have inhabited these islands. And we have, in modern times now, 462,000 square kilometres that are under Scotland's management. That's a huge area, a huge responsibility on our part to make sure we steward those areas and look after them. And we do, of course, have, as others have said, competing interests. Clearly, we want to protect the marine environment and give a due regard, as others have said, to looking after key species and key habitats in our marine environment. And certainly in my time as Environment Minister previously, I know that was an enormous challenge with growing pressures from different industries. Now I'm responsible for the energy sector. I'm seeing it from the other side, so it's quite interesting to have both sides of that argument in my own experience. But we have 25% of Europe's wind power potential. Most of that is in our offshore areas. And clearly, with the sectoral marine plan for offshore wind having been published in the latter half of last year, that's now set out some significant targets for growth in production of clean energy in our oceans. And that, alongside plans for marine energy to be rolled out, tidal and wave power, and existing pressures from oil and gas, future pressures from carbon capture, and potentially from hydrogen production offshore. These are all competing interests. And of course, as others have said, we also have our fisheries sector, both the static gear sector and mobile gear sector. And these are traditional industries, and many coastal communities are dependent on them. But we're also very fortunate. We have one of the, I think in Europe, certainly tremendous biodiversity. And my first parliamentary question back in 2011, going back a long way, was around basking sharks. So from the very beginning, I've been interested in the marine environment. And what we have to do is, looking forward from the point of view of the Scottish Government, as was, and my party now in this election, is to try and take forward the future fisheries management strategy, which Fergus Ewing has outlined, contains a 12-point action plan to help us achieve our vision. And none of these actions will be achieved overnight, and many require further research and development. Indeed, we're doing great work in Scotland through the ScotMer programme, trying to understand the health of our environment, to understand how we can absorb additional pressure from industries like offshore wind without damaging keynote species such as seabirds. And in terms of the maintaining environmental standards, clearly we have seen Brexit happen. We are now out of the European Union ourselves, and certainly the Greens are keen to get back into the European Union. And from our point of view, we want to maintain environmental standards while we are outside the European Union, so we can facilitate as easy as possible a transition back into the European Union at some point in the future. But clearly, I think, as Claudia was saying, climate change is also having a huge impact on our seas. The pressure in terms of acidification, the absorption of CO2 by the oceans, the increased energy that there is within the oceans, causing greater storms, causing issues with climate adaptation for coastal communities. There's a great onus on us to make sure we manage them. And Claudia is right to raise the issue of kelp forests, indeed seagrass and mirral beds as well, as being excellent ways in which we can use these habitats to absorb CO2 and strengthen our ability, as we've done with forests and peatland on land. We can manage these assets for the benefit of the environment, but also to improve our ability to absorb CO2 emissions. But others have mentioned, in terms of future of fisheries management, I'll wind up, Rob, apologies, just the issue of remote electronic monitoring. I hope we do get the chance to say more on that tonight, because that is something we have committed to introduce legislation by the end of this calendar year to place remote electronic monitoring on board all pelagic vessels fishing in our waters, and implementation will follow after that. Thank you, Rob.